Welcome to Tenant Action Today, brought to you by the Met Council on Housing, the Citywide Tenants Union. If you believe in tenants' rights, if you want to help preserve the affordable housing we have and expand the supply of affordable housing, you should find the next hour to be of interest. Among other things, you will be able to call in and ask a question about a problem you are having with your landlord or about your rights as a tenant and get an answer from a tenant attorney right here on the air. You will also get some of the latest news of interest to tenant advocates. Finally, and most importantly, you will learn how you can help the campaign to restore our rent protection laws, which are due to expire in a few short months and are in danger of being phased out. My name is Jaron Benjamin. I'm a community organizer and the executive director of Met Council on Housing. And throughout the next hour, we're going to give you some information about sources of advice and information for tenants. Sometimes this information will be at the bottom of the screen, sometimes on the full screen, so you might want to get a pen and paper so you can write them down as we go along. My guest for this program is Harvey Epstein of the Urban Justice Center. Welcome, Harvey.
Thank you, Jaron.
Boy, you survived the preliminary vote for the Rent Guidelines Board. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It was a long, arduous vote, but we got through a good week.
I think 2.5 million tenants should be proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we take calls, a few short things you should know about the Met Council on Housing. First, Met Council runs a tenant help hotline every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1:30 to 5 p.m. Tenants can call 212-979-0611 during those hours to get advice from a live counselor. Also, Met Council on Housing has a weekly radio program called Housing Notebook on WBAI FM 99.5 on the FM dial. Housing Notebook is on the radio every Monday from 8 to 9 p.m. You can also listen to them on the internet at www.wbai.org. Finally, Met Council on Housing publishes the only tenant newspaper in New York City called Tenant Inquilino. Those who become members of Met Council receive the newspaper in the mail every month. And we have stories in this month's issue about appointments to the Rent Guidelines Board and de Blasio's housing plan. And one more important point, Metropolitan Council on Housing is not and has never been affiliated with the Metropolitan Council on Jewish Poverty. We are completely separate organizations. Now, here are some brief news items and announcements of interest to tenants. First, on Monday evening, the New York City Rent Guidelines Board voted for preliminary rent adjustments for rent-stabilized tenants whose leases come up for renewal in the year beginning October 1st. The de Blasio Board continued the Bloomberg practice of adopting a range of adjustments instead of an actual number. For one-year lease renewals, the board voted on a range of 0 to 3%. For two-year renewals, the range was 0.5%, so 0.5%, to 4.5%. The final vote will be on Monday, June 23rd, where the board will adopt an actual number. Will the one-year renewal be a 0? Possibly. With the two-year renewal, will the two-year renewal be a 0? It doesn't look likely, despite Mayor de Blasio's pledge to freeze rents when he was campaigning to be elected mayor last year. There will be 4 public hearings in June in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Tenants vastly outnumbered landlords in attendance. Next, the New York City Council held a hearing last week on Intro 243, a bill to implement an increase in the income eligibility threshold for the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption Program, commonly called SCREE. The bill was introduced by Council Member Margaret Chen and is co-sponsored by 8 of her colleagues. The state budget adopted a month ago and included a provision allowing cities and municipalities in the suburbs to raise the household income threshold from $29,000 per year to $50,000 per year. If enacted by the City Council, which seems to be a pretty sure bet, the new standard will go into effect on July 1st. The Community Service Society estimates that another 10,000 elderly households will be eligible for scree under this new standard. The City Council estimates that 24,000. Of course, elderly tenants will have the right to sign up for scree, or will have to sign up for scree, and not all who are eligible apply. It is unfortunate that the state legislature did not authorize an increase in the income eligibility threshold for the DRE, or the disability rent increase exemption. The City Council is expected to pass the bill sometime next month, and the new income threshold becomes effective July 1st. And finally, former City Council member Oliver Capel announced earlier this week that he will challenge State Senator Jeffrey Klein in a Democratic primary in September. The district is part in the Bronx and part in Westchester County. Klein is the leader of a breakaway faction of Democrats who have entered into a power-sharing agreement with the Republicans that has kept the Republicans in control of the state Senate, even though they are the numerical minority. Among other negative results, this has allowed the Republicans to prevent any pro-tenant bill from passing the Senate. Capel has accused Klein of betraying the progressive causes by empowering the GOP. So, Harvey, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. I think the Rent Guidelines Board vote, the 0 to 3 and 0.5 to 4.5, is something that's been on all the papers. It's been on the news. You were there. What do you think the chances are of us getting a 0 for that 1 year?
So that's a really good question, and I think it's really going to be up to us. At this point, we have a range of 0 to 3 for a 1 year and 0.5 to 4.5 for a 2 year. And it's really going to be about who can come out and talk to the Rent Guidelines Board and convince the 5 public members of what they need. Now, we heard in the papers, and we saw there, that the landlords are really upset with this range. Mm-hmm. They're fearful of a 0. Mm-hmm. And I think they're fearful of a 0 because they're fearful of cutting into their profits. And we need to say as tenants and the tenant community why we need a rent freeze. We need to say it loud, we need to say it clear, and we need to say it in large numbers. And if we do that, if we can do that in really large numbers in every borough across the city, or at least 4 where we're having our hearings, if we can do that in 4 boroughs across the city, we will be able to kind of push the 5 public members to side with a rent freeze. Now, the only thing I would say is, I'm talking about large turnouts. I'm not talking about a few people or even a few hundred people. We will really need thousands of tenants to say this is our priority and tell the public members that this is an important thing and why a rent freeze is what we need now and why we can see landlords' incomes are going up and tenants' incomes are going down and why the rent freeze is an important piece of their lives. Why, if without the rent freeze, they may not be able to keep their homes. Why the rent increases over the last years has caused an increase in homelessness. All the things we know, we need to convince those 5 public members that we're right.
Right. So I did want to draw folks' attention to what happened earlier in the meeting where Shayla Garcia, one of our new tenant members of the Rent Guidelines Board, proposed a rent rollback of -6 to 0 for 1 year and -2 to 0 for 2 years. That was, I think it was a bold move, and there were 3 votes for it. There's actually a public member that voted for a rent rollback.
Yeah, well, what we proposed was a range from -6 to 0. So in theory, the 0 could have been in that
You're
range.
Right.
So, but the idea was, based on all the data and based on the information, it's clear that landlords are making lots of net operating income. The price index, income and expense data, all points to the point that landlords are doing well. And what Shayla was trying to say was that these facts are clear. The facts are also clear that tenants' incomes are going down and that tenants are struggling and barely able to survive. And unless we do something now, unless we take a step now, we're going to increase homelessness, which is at record numbers. Over 50,000 people in New York City alone are currently homeless, and over 100,000 people have gone through the homeless shelter this year.
That's amazing. That's
so it's
staggering.
It's staggering numbers. So we have to make a stand. We have to talk, and we have to explain to people why this is a problem. We need to explain it in a way that people understand that the public members will understand, that the administration will understand, and the landlord reps are going to understand. But I'll just add one more thing. Don't be surprised that if they turn out people. So if the landlords turn out lots of numbers of people and we don't turn out thousands of people, we know what the results are going to be.
Exactly. I think at this point it's all about pressure. Who can generate the most pressure? I mean, tenants, you know, as a movement, I think over the last few months and last year, I've seen more and more activity happening in the streets, more and more fervor in meetings like the Rent Guidelines Board. It was absolutely packed. We're going to need to see that 5 more times when you talk about the final vote to guarantee that. I think that while some are upset that rent rollback was probably the right thing to do, that we didn't get it, and I would say that instead of saying, well, you know, what about you know, what didn't happen, I think it's probably more productive to think about what can we as a tenant movement do to move to change the climate here. Right.
I think that's right. And we also have to be in the place where we can be at the table when they're having these conversations, so they need to know we're important.
Right.
And we don't have the money that the landlords have. That's clear, right? All we have is our feet. All we have is our numbers, right? So that's what we have to use to convince anyone that we matter, that we're important.
All right. Well, we've got a caller. Hello, caller. You're on Tenant Action today.
Am I on there?
Yes, you're on the air.
My situation is that I live in a brownstone, and there's only 2 tenants left in the building. Otherwise, it would be vacant. And the landlord's trying to move me to another apartment. And I was wondering, mind you, also, I'm on Dree. And I was wondering what's better, Dree or a life tendency? Because I was told that a life tendency would be a possibility if I moved to another apartment. Can you give me some information on that?
Yeah, so basically what they're trying to suggest to you, if based on what you're telling me, is you're a rent-regulated tenant now. They want you to relocate out of the building and lose the rent regulatory status, but essentially give you a contractual right for a life tenancy in a new apartment at certain rents with certain rent increases.
That's correct.
So for you, it's really, if you move out, I assume that apartment will get deregulated, so we'll lose one more rent-regulated apartment.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I don't know where they want to move you to and what the situation is for you. They want you to waive other rights like succession rights and other claims that you might otherwise have.
Right.
So, you know, obviously we can't speak for your life, and then you'll have to I would encourage you to have a lawyer to write and review the documents that if you were interested in signing it. But it's really about being contractually protected than statutorily protected.
Right. Yeah, no, I would definitely take your advice of getting an attorney involved, most definitely.
Right. And it's really, I mean, I don't know where you live, and I don't know what your health situation is versus where they want you to move you to. And those are life choices that people have to make themselves.
Right.
But we've seen this, and I've seen this happen, you know, really dozens and dozens of times where people make decisions based on their own lives to make a choice about moving. And that's really something you have to decide about. It sounds like they're open to the life tenancy, which is a really important thing. I would always want that not just to be a contract between 2 parties, but somehow recorded in a separate place so everyone knew it. It was a more public document than a private contract. Sometimes landlords don't want to record those agreements, but I would always push to get that recorded.
Where would you have it recorded?
So if wherever you're moving to, I assume they own the other property too?
That's correct.
Right? So they can put it as, you could put it as they record it with the deed. So if they sell the property, the new owner of the new property will have notice of you and notice of your life interest because they may want to litigate against you because they'll say, well, it's an unregulated unit, you have to go.
Right.
You don't. So I would just be mindful that private contracts are enforceable, but then you have to enforce it. If the world knows, because it's recorded with the deed, that this agreement exists, then it's a lot easier for you. If in the circumstance, 10 years down the road, the owner wants to sell that building and you get a new owner who wants to be a harasser, who will bring you to court 6 or 7 times, some private equity company who doesn't care about tenants.
All right. Well, thanks, caller.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for calling in. We've got another caller ready. Hello, you're on Tenant Action today.
Yes.
Yes, you're on.
Oh, hi. Hello?
Yes, we're here.
Okay. I am very anxious to know where the Rent Guidelines Board is going to be on the whole question of rent freeze. Are we going to be able to have a rent freeze this year?
Yeah, so I'll just give the first part of the answer, and I'll let Harvey talk about the rest of it. So the range that the Rent Guidelines Board settled on was 0% increase to 3% increase for the first year. So that's a possibility. I think if we generate enough pressure, it's not inconceivable that we could have rent freeze for the first year. For 2-year leases, it's 0.5, so 0.5 to 4.5. And I mean, there's, a 0.5% increase is pretty close to a rent freeze. So Harvey, where do you think we are?
So I think we're in a really good place around this issue. This is this is a pretty historic moment that we can have in the range, a potential for a freeze, or even a potential for a 0.5 in a 2-year lease.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have to be mindful that there are huge real estate interests looking at millions and millions of dollars for every point increase in rent in the Rent Guidelines Board numbers. So there's a lot of pressure on the 5 public members to push the number up. There's going to be a lot of pressure put on by the landlords to push that number up. I assume they're going to turn people out. If I were them, I would turn as many people out as I could. So I guess the question I would turn back to you is that it really is a question of what you can do. Because everyone knows the way I'm voting. Like, there's no pressure on me. I'm just one person. I'm going to show up. It's really you, caller, and all the neighbors and friends and people you know in rent-stabilized apartments who are the ones who are able to control this outcome. If you and all your friends and your neighbors and the friends and their neighbors, and we get thousands of tenants out there, and we say we demand a rent freeze, and that we're lopsided 8-1 in our favor, and that message is going to get communicated to the mayor. That message will be clear to the mayor that tenants really care about this. And then that'll be a message that will go to the 5 public members, that'll go to everyone, the landlords, that'll go to real estate. They'll know we're all interested in this, and everyone's going to have to take notice of what we're doing, and everyone's going to care about what we're saying, and that's when we get the potential rent freeze. Because it's about pressure and counter-pressure.
Absolutely. So I think the answer here is turn that anxiety into action, right?
That's a great message.
So we thank you so much, caller, for calling in.
Thank you.
All right. And we have another caller. Go ahead, caller. I think she's coming on, or he is coming on very shortly.
Hello?
Hello. You're on Tenant Action today.
Thank you. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment that it was recently bought by a different company. And now my lease expired this month, May. I called the landlord since the beginning of April asking for the new lease. They told me they will send it to me next week, and I didn't receive it. So I called them again in April, and they told me the same thing. So what can I do to make them to give me to offer me the new lease?
Right. They're supposed to send you that 150 days before the expiration, aren't they?
At least 90.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So you should have got that months ago.
Yes. When I called them, they told me that they were, according to the regulations, they would do it on before 1 month before the lease expires.
Yeah, well, they're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to send it to you at least 3 months before the lease expires. It gives you a chance to sign it and send it back, and you get 30 days to send it back.
Right.
But the lease is expired May 1st?
May 30th.
Okay. So they're already behind. And since you're a rent-stabilized tenant, you're a statutory tenant. That means even if you don't get a renewal lease, you still have your tenancy rights. Nothing changes. You just don't get a rent increase.
Right.
So sometimes people get really stressed out, but the lease expires and they're not getting a new lease. And I always tell people, if you can deal with the stress about it, then don't worry about it, because that means your rent doesn't go up. And when you get the lease, you get the lease, and then you'll sign the lease, and then the rent will increase later. In addition, since the guidelines are going to change as of October 1st, and they're going to be lower than the 4 and 7
my.
3/4 that exist right now, I'm not sure I'd be rushing for getting the increases that are in effect now. If your lease doesn't start till October 1st, those guidelines increases are guaranteed to be lower.
Right.
So if you do get a lease, I would encourage you to sign a 1-year lease because that's going to be the 2-year lease will be way higher than you'd get if you wait a year. And do a 1-year lease, and then in a year from now, the increases will be probably a lot lower than you're looking at right now.
But
So
if
I would not
I'm
stress
sorry,
out about it if I could avoid and then let them send it to you when they send it to you.
Right. I mean, I
So
think.
I risk the chance of them trying to evict me because of not having a lease?
No. So what Harvey was saying is that you're a statutory tenant. What that means is you don't have to leave. You're there. Everything in your previous lease still counts. You still keep paying the same rent. All it means is that you don't have to pay more rent. Now, if it makes you nervous, you can file a complaint form with HCR. It's called, what is that, the RA 90 or the 89? Well, who's counting? So you can call DHCR and file a complaint.
But this should just be clear that there's nothing to be concerned about them trying to evict you. You have
How
a right
long
to
do I
stay.
have if they tell me that they are not going to give me a lease?
That's against the law.
They are required under the law to give you a renewal lease. You can go to the housing agency, the Housing and Community Renewal, and ask them to fill out a form and say, my landlord hasn't given me a lease. I'd like them, have you compel them to give me a lease, order them to give me a lease. And the state agency will do that. So if it makes you stressful, that's a thing to do. You can also just wait. They can't bring a case against you as long as you pay your rent and you don't do anything that violates the lease, like doing anything that's illegal. You have a right to remain in that apartment. That's what rent stabilization provides, the right to remain in the apartment. Whether you get the lease or not, you still have a right to stay.
Okay, that gives me pause then because they don't have any right to evict me as long as I am on time with my rent.
That's right.
Exactly.
Okay. I have a different question. I live in the 6th floor, and it seems that the building is kind of settling down or shifting. The fact is that the ceiling of the living room and the bedroom is fracturing. And it's badly fractured, you know. So if I ask these people to repair this matter, I practically not have no living space. What is my option here?
So just do you know your rights around repairs? Your landlord, you have a right under what's called the warranty of habitability that you have to have apartment free of conditions and a common area free of repair problems. So the landlord has to fix it. They also can't reduce your apartment size or can't change your apartment because they're fixing something. That would be also another problem that they would have with the law. So you should feel very comfortable complaining to the landlord or calling 311 and saying, hey, I have a repair problem. I want the landlord to fix it. The city can send out an inspector and tell the landlord they have to fix it. You can also file a case in housing court called an HP action. Or third, you could go back to that same state agency, HCR, and file a complaint because they don't do repairs.
Right.
So you have a lot of options there, but keep in mind, when you file a complaint, they can't evict you because you complained about repairs. 2 is they're not allowed to reduce your apartment because you're complaining about repairs. Now, if there are structural problems in the building, which we've seen, unfortunately, all too frequent, the city can take steps to either force the landlord to fix the structural problems. In the rare instances, we've seen vacate orders, but that's extremely rare. So I would not be fearful that if there's a problem that you want the landlord to fix, that you take the steps to ask them to fix it or ask the city to force them to fix it.
Right. I think the takeaway here is that you're doing pretty much everything right, and you shouldn't be worried about it. You should assert your right to a safe, stable home. All right, thanks.
My only concern is that while they are going to be repairing, I don't have a living room, I don't have a bedroom.
Oh, so he's concerned that if they repair it, where is he going to live?
Well, let me be clear about this. They have a legal obligation to do the work. They can't kick you out of your apartment while they do their work, right? There's no law that requires them to put you up in a hotel or any other location, but we've negotiated agreements with landlords all the time when they're doing work that doesn't allow a tenant to be in occupancy, where a landlord will negotiate for a few days to put someone up in a short-term other apartment that they own or a hotel that they know about so they can get access to those rooms they need and get their work done. But the reality is, what the law says is they have to do work. They can do work between the work hours of 9 to 5, get the work done as they can, and then they close up the holes or they close up the area and they cover all the problems that they had with plastic or whatever they need to do, and you live there the rest of the evening and that night.
Right.
So they don't have to take away a room. They can do some work and you can come back in the evening.
Right.
So there are a few options available. Don't let that stop you from getting work done in your apartment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, caller. We've got a couple of more people on hold.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help.
All right. Well, there are a lot of people, I'm sure, that are going to call tonight about repairs because I think the New York Times had a great story that exposed just how some of these places are in really bad shape. I think we can go to the next caller who's on. Hello, caller. If you can hear me, you're on Tenant Action Today.
Yes, hi.
Hi. You're on.
Okay, thanks. I understand that the
Hello, are you still there?
yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. I understand that this decrease for the rent stabilization tenant will go into effect in July, and this doesn't apply to rent control tenants.
So are you talking about the SCREE? So the only thing that goes into effect on July 1st is the potential increase for the threshold for the senior citizens rent increase exemption. The rent freeze or the rent adjustment won't take effect until October 1st.
But that wouldn't apply to rent control tenants.
Correct. So Rent Guidelines Board does not apply to rent-controlled tenants, only to rent-stabilized tenants.
You know, rent-controlled tenants is governed by HCR, and the state agency sets the increases every year based on the application filed by the landlord. So if your landlord's filing an application for a rent increase and they can get a 7.5% increase, that you'll get an order from HCR every year telling you what the new rent is. Rent Guidelines Board is something very different.
Right.
Okay. I have one more question.
Sure.
I had heard that on the last couple of shows that there was going to be a rally in Albany in May.
Oh, boy. So there is, I know that a couple of tenant groups went up to Albany later or earlier this week or last week or whenever that was.
Oh.
Right. But as far as a large-scale rally, I think that we're going to hold off on that until later this summer, just because there's so much going on here in the city.
Okay.
I think that a lot of folks would agree that while we need to be everywhere, we also need to focus our energy. So we have the potential to have a rent freeze for the first time ever. I think we might want to focus our attention here, and I think it seems like other groups have said the same thing.
Yeah, and keep in mind we have 4 hearings in the month of June, where if you want to go rally, we have 4 opportunities in the month of June for 4 Rent Guidelines Board hearings in 4 boroughs in a 2-week period. We have a lot of work to get done that we can, on June 23rd, have a vote that includes a rent freeze for a 1-year lease. So I love rallies, and we're all about rallies, but if, let's do it here in the city right now and look at longer-term rallies after June's up and we get past Rent Guidelines Board season.
Right.
Okay. I don't mind participating, but I'm a rent control tenant.
Okay.
We'll take everyone. We'll take rent control. Anyone who wants to talk about rent fees, we'll take landlords.
Yeah.
We'll take anybody.
I'm a market rate tenant, and I'll be out there front and center. Thank you so much for calling in. We hope to see you out there.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Yeah, I know some people were kind of thrown for a loop when it looks like there's not going to be a tenant lobby day after all, but, this is a chance at history.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can't be everywhere, and
Right.
that's the reality. So there's a lot of fights going on here in the city. We have some new laws potentially on additional protections on tenant harassment going on.
Yeah.
We have the SCREE bill in the city council.
Right.
You have potential right to counsel bills.
Right.
There's a lot of things happening in the city Not that we don't care deeply about what's going on in Albany, but we got to, we got a
These
lot
are
in front of us.
immediate changes to people's lives. We have another caller on hold. Caller, you're on the air with Tenant Action Today.
Hello?
Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm not sure if you can answer my question, but my question has to do with Section 8.
Okay.
I am my part of my rent is covered by Section 8. And a couple of weeks ago, I took a nasty fall in the street, and I broke my wrist. I needed surgery, and I was advised to go and get a lawyer. So according to the people that I talked in the law department, they told me that this case had to go. They have to sue the city. So now my question is the following: how am I going to be affected on my Section 8? Am I have to turn whatever money comes from that case, turn it to Section 8, or my rent is going to go up? That's my question.
So that's a very good question about Section 8. So some portion of your rent is paid by Section 8, and the balance, you pay 30% of your income towards rent, right?
Correct.
And
I'm also a senior citizen.
So you're also a senior citizen. At some point, if your case gets settled, you file a lawsuit for damages. Whatever income you collect in the year that you settle the case is income, right?
Right.
So whatever that is will be, it'll be part of your income for the year, and it'll affect your 30%. So let's say you get Social Security and you make $30,000.
Right.
And so your Section 8 rent is based on the $30,000. In the year you settle the case, your income, let's say, is $40,000.
Right.
The Section 8 will just, you'll pay more of your income, you'll pay more of the rent, but it'll still be 30% of your income.
Right.
Okay.
Because they readjust you every year based on your actual income.
Are they going to take in consideration all of the expenses that I'm going through with this accident?
When you say expenses...
Expensive meaning you have to eating out because due to my fault, I'm not able to cook, I'm not able to clean.
Yeah.
I had to, at the beginning, I had to take taxis because I could not travel in the buses. At the beginning of the accident, the day of the surgery, I had to spend $100 for someone to come and pick me up because I live by myself. So, in other words, I did incur in a lot of expense that I normally don't have.
So the answer would be, it really depends on how the lawyer you hire structures a settlement agreement.
Okay.
So the way it's written will tell you whether what's taxable income and what's not, what's reimbursing for expenses. So because some of the money is going to go to you for pain and suffering, some of the money might go to you, assuming you get money, to reimburse for costs. Some of the money you're going to get is going to go to your lawyer.
Right.
So it all depends on how the settlement is written. We'll explain to you what's taxable or not, and what's taxable is then what counts towards your Section 8. So it's really once you hire a lawyer and you file a case, you'll have a lot more information because it's all really theoretical right now because you haven't even filed a case yet.
Okay. Okay, I thought I called you guys because perhaps it will be an other people's advantage.
Yeah.
If this knows this information, because I wonder how many people will stop themselves from pursuing a lawsuit because they are afraid. Because some of us, we are afraid. We don't want to lose our subsidies.
Well, let me just tell you this: unless you're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're not going to lose your Section 8. The question will be, how much of the rent will you pay that year when you get income? And you could structure the settlement that you could get a little bit each year over a long period of time. You could get, let's say, $5,000 a year over 5 years, so your income wouldn't go up substantially in the years that you're getting, so it won't have a detrimental effect on your Section 8. There's a lot of ways to structure it in a way based on your current circumstances, and I really would encourage you to talk to your lawyer about it and sit down with them.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you
good
so
luck
much,
with that.
caller.
Hope you feel better
bye-bye.
soon.
Yeah. Take care of that wrist. It's good to have you here. I don't know very many people that could just straight off answer that question. We've got another caller. Hello, you're on Tenant Action Today.
Hello.
Hello.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. My question is about the rent increase with the 2-year lease. I'm not clear on what you're saying. Let's say the 1 year is freeze at zero, hypothetically. Let's say a 2 year is a low rate, like 1% or 2%. Should a person take a 2-year lease because in 2 years will the rent go up really high, or you don't know how much it'll go up? So what would you suggest about a 2%? Taking a 2-year lease based on how much it might go up. So that's what you wasn't clear on.
Yeah, that's a. Thank you for the question.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people are going to be faced with this question this year, and I think it's really going to be about people's risk tolerance. Some people like going to Vegas and gambling and rolling the dice, and some people like to play it a little safer, right? And I think the reality is, if there's a rent freeze for a 1 year and a 2%, like you said, for a 2 year, it's who knows what next year is going to be like.
Those would be historically low.
Those would be historically low. So we've never had a 0, as you know. We've never had a 2 on a 2 year. So that would be as low as we'd ever seen it. So is it possible to repeat that? We don't have any crystal balls here. We don't know what it's going to look like. The economy is going to look like in 2 years. But just keep in mind, this is a historic moment. So the idea, we don't have historic moments year after year traditionally, right? So you just keep that in mind as you're thinking about it. So some people are going to be excited and do the 1 year freeze because it might be a freeze if we get it, and that would be extremely exciting. And some people will be like, you know what? If I can do a 2% for 2 years, that's so much better for me financially because I have 2 years of planning. That I know what it's going to look like. I'll just do that. So it's really about your own personal choices and your own risk tolerance.
Yeah.
So you won't lean either way. Just take kind of. So you don't have suggestions. So just go with what I think.
I think it's different for everybody. I mean, people that have steady sources of income and you know that you're going to be making the same or more 2 years from now, or you can have the reasonable expectation. You feel like you might be able to plan for longer term. Some people don't like where they're living and want to move next year. So I mean, I think just because everybody's situation is different, couldn't really say one or the other.
Yeah, some people who can deal with what we call fluctuations in the market. Because if 1 year, like last year, was 4 7 3/4, some people would be like, that they can take a 4 7 3/4 and do that for 2 years. But some people will be like, I'll do a 4% because maybe the year after will be better. And so some people might want to do the 0 because financially it'd be beneficial for them because they want to keep the freeze because they lost their job or their finances are really tight. And some people might say, I'll do a 2 year because then I know what it'll look like for the next 2 years. And it really is a personal choice, and I don't think I could recommend one or the other. But I would say to anyone who's taking decisions about this year, whether to do a 1 or 2 year lease, I would always tell people to do a 1 year this year because next year is definitely going to be better. So if you're making a decision now between now and September 30th, and when your lease is up, do a 1 year.
Right.
Next year, it's going to be if it's a 0 and a 5, I would tell people to do the 0. Right. But if it's a 1 and a 2, I might suggest people to do a 2 because a 2 for 2 years is much better than a 1 for 1 year.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, look, thanks a lot. I appreciate that because I did a 4-year lease, so now my lease is due in July of next year, so I didn't get caught with that 7 thing. So I think I'll do a 2 year. It's like 2% or something. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks for calling in. I can never tell somebody what to do in that situation. I think it's up to the individual.
Yeah. And I think in certain, like this year, it's a little cleaner to me, you know, because we know what it looks like now, and we know it's going to be better next year. But those are the rare circumstances, right?
Yes, hasn't happened once in 45 years. We've got another caller on the air now. Hello, you're on Tenant Action Today.
Hello.
Hello, you're on.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yes. Thank you for your wonderful program. I have a couple questions concerning a lease that I signed about 10 months ago. My apartment was on fire initially, and then I had to vacate the apartment. So in the process, I requested transfer, and they gave me a transfer. So when I went to sign the lease, and they put an objection, to give me the lease for 2 years. And that's something that I can, argue at that moment, and I have to sign the lease for 1 year. So now the lease is due for renewal, and they include not only the 1 year, but they give me the option of having 2 years. It's a rent stabilized apartment. So I just want to know about what is my position. I haven't signed the new lease yet, the renewal yet. So it's due to renew on May 31st of this year. So I would like to know how you advise me on that.
Is your question whether you would sign a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease right now?
Yeah, it's due for renewal on May 31st. I haven't signed it. I got the lease for the past 2 months, the renewal about 2 months ago, but I haven't signed it yet. So, but at the previous apartment that I lived for 6-7 years, it used to be 1 or 2 years. But they put a condition on the new lease that they cannot give me a 2-year lease, which I request when I sign the lease. I just want to know if there is some room for me to request like the other year that they don't give me when I sign the lease.
Well,
so they just gave me 1 year.
If you signed a 1-year lease last year, that's what you signed. If you're a rent-stabilized tenant, the landlord is required to offer you a 1 or 2 year lease. And unless it's your initial lease, which it doesn't sound like it is, that's what the law says. Sounds like what they did is they relocated you from one apartment that they owned to another apartment that they owned. And when they moved you, they treated you like a new tenant instead of an existing tenant. So I think what you have to do is, since it was a year ago, I'm not sure going back and arguing that, unless you have some kind of written documentation about giving up the other apartment and getting this apartment, I would want to see all that documentation to look at it. If our advice going forward, if for this year is whether you sign a 1 or 2 year lease, it sounds like a 1 year lease makes much more sense based on knowing that it's 4% and 7.75% as the guidelines now, and the range for next year is definitely going to be lower. So even the 1 and 2 year range is going to be lower. So I would recommend that you would sign a 1 year lease now for this year. But going back, I think someone would have to look at all those documents and figure out what happened and how you moved and what happened with the fire and what your rights are to your apartment and what this lease was, whether it was just a new tenancy or it was an extension of your old tenancy.
No, it was a new tenancy.
So then as a new tenant, they have a right to offer you a 1 year lease as a new tenant when you first move in, which it sounds like they did, but subsequent years are required to offer you 1 and 2 year leases.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I have another question.
Okay.
The previous apartment that I live with, I had to vacate because of the fire. Where should I go to find out what caused that fire so I can, I had a substantial loss during the fire. So I would like to see if I can get that part of my losses. So who should I address the issue,
Yeah,
I addressed the issue initially to the landlord, but he didn't give me no answer at the moment. It was too early. Well, at this point, the fire happened like 11 months ago. Where should I go to find out?
I would just tell you, it doesn't really matter the cause of the fire. Your landlord has insurance, right? And I hope maybe you had tenant insurance too, because I would encourage you to. But if you didn't, the landlord has insurance, and the insurance covers the losses in the apartment. So you can make a claim to the landlord's insurance companies by filing all the documentation. Usually those insurance companies have timelines to submit the documentation, and I've never seen it happen longer than a year. So if you have losses, you need to submit that to the landlord now, and if not, file a lawsuit against the landlord in the old apartment to recover your damages. But you need to really document what you lost and prove that there were actual costs associated with the things you lost.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much, caller. That sounds like a really tough. I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, there was a fire in our house, and it's really unfortunate. It's tough to recover from that kind of thing.
It's really hard to do, and people struggle with that.
Yeah. So we have another caller. Caller, you're on Tenant Action today.
Hello.
Hello. We can hear you.
I heard something you were talking about before, and I got kind of confused. You were talking about the new amount of income that they're going to have for the senior rent increase exemption, the SCREE. And somebody you mentioned there that it was not for rent-controlled tenants? And I know some people who are on rent control and who are on that $29,000 scree income.
No, we didn't say it wasn't for rent control. We just said the increase went up for SCREE and just not for DRE.
Right.
For the disability rent increase exemption program. So rent controlled or rent stabilized tenants are eligible for SCREE and DRE. Just the income guidelines did not go up for the DRE.
All right. Because everybody's getting all excited, if it goes up to 50,000, And I had read somewhere also that is after taxes. Is that correct?
My understanding is it's gross income. So when you say after,
I saw somewhere online, because I was looking, the legislature and all about the thing, and I saw somewhere it says excluding, after taxes, the income you get after taxes. I did not see gross. See, there are many people coming from different directions saying different things. It's very confusing sometimes.
Yeah, I understand it's really confusing, but I think Met Council and Tenants and Neighbors and other housing groups will have fact sheets. It's my understanding that it is gross income, that it's not after taxes after income. Income after taxes. Right. There might be some other specific exclusions from it, but it's really gross income.
Right. That's the way it's always been. And when you're talking about the DRE increase, I hear that Gail Brewer is hoping to get something started around that.
Oh.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for calling in. Boy, this could wind up being a pretty big year for tenants if we get the very first rent freeze in the history of the Rent Guidelines Board. The SCREE increasing it from $29,000 to $50,000. I mean, that's a big increase. And but next year is the big one, the chance to repeal vacancy deregulation at the state level.
Yeah, between vacancy deregulation and ERSTAT, we got two heavy hitters for us next year.
Yeah,
and it's hard to know which is going to be the harder nut. Like, I think there's some good signs out of Albany that maybe they've had enough headaches with this that they may want to discuss repealing ERSTAT and giving us a little more power. But I think this year will inform next year. I think two things. One is that's a big thing. If we can get that, that's a game changer.
Absolutely.
Repealing vacancy deregulation, destabilization isn't a game changer as well. Both are going to have real estate climbing off the walls. They're going to be spending lots of money in Albany trying to keep their existing power because they know that if they keep this destabilization going on, deregulation going on, we're going to have less and less units, less and less power, and so we'll be less and less powerful in Albany and in City Hall.
And they'll have more and more money.
More and more money, there'll be no competition for them, and there'll be no balance. So they know and we know 2015 is a big year for all of us, and whether there's a shift of balance of power or not. Right now, the balance of power has been in their direction. They have the money. They can really control things in Albany, and so we have the people. And then we got 2.5 million people. We got 50,000 of them or 100,000 of them to make a huge statement. It would make a difference.
Right.
I remember in '97 when the rent laws expired and we were all out on the street and we were pushing really hard and we got thousands of people to go in front of the governor's office. And Pataki folded. He caved. He backed off the cliff. And it was only about getting the thousands of people out in front of his office and saying, we will not back down. And we'll go from 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. And Pataki then realized that it wasn't a fight he wanted to have.
Right. And I think that's a similar thing we're going to have to do next year. I think, talking about Oliver Capel running against Jeff Klein, I think that some people who are thinking about renewing and expanding and strengthening the rent laws next year and repealing vacancy deregulation see the Senate Republicans as a big obstacle, not necessarily because Republicans are awful people, but because the Senate Republicans have been bankrolled, it seems, by the real estate industry.
Yeah, if we could take a few seats in the Senate and then have the Democrats, not the IDC, but the Democrats, be in a position to really control what's going on in the Senate, that's a game changer for us as well.
Absolutely.
But we need to get those seats back. We need to get a couple seats back from the Republicans. If we can do that, we can pull a couple seats back from people who are in support of tenant issues, and that race, the Malcolm Smith race with Leroy Comrie in Queens, those are really going to be interesting races to watch, because if we can have some seats that the Democrats can maintain a strong coalition, or maybe the IDC folds back in with the Democrats because I hear those conversations still go on.
Right.
If we can get something that puts Democrats into power in the Senate, then we have real opportunities to make a difference for next year. Real opportunities to make a difference on maintaining affordable housing and preserving units. I mean, the mayor said it. You know, we're talking about preservation as a big plan, and the biggest preservation plan would be to strengthen rent stabilization.
Exactly. You know, two things come to mind. One, I remember during the CC Katchik race, I took some time off of my job then, and went to Ulster County and went up to Woodstock and did some door-to-door campaigning for, you know, CC Katchik is a Democrat. She was running against George Amador. A lot of people felt like if CC Katchik won, the Democrats would have control of the state Senate.
Right.
And the thing that I kept thinking, you know, you know, we're in Woodstock. It's cold. It's dark. I can't see my hand in front of my face. I have a flashlight. And every time I thought, you know, maybe I should just call for a pickup, call somebody to come pick me up, and I'm done.
Right.
I thought, how hard do you want your real job to be? Do you want it to be easier? Because I knew if we got, you know, if the Democrats took control of the Senate, that my job would be a lot easier. And then Jeff Klein threw it all away, or he, you know, took the money and ran whichever way. I think the other thing I wanted to bring up is that if Oliver Capel could beat Jeff Klein, one of the things that it says to the other members of the IDC is that we're coming after you. You can lose your seat, and I think that gives them a big incentive to rejoin the Democrats.
Yeah, I think that race is kind of an interesting race for all of us to watch, to see where people stand on different issues. Let's hear the conversation about rent laws. You know, where's Coppell going to be on this? You know, where's Klein going to be? What are they going to sign on to? What are they going to commit to? And then we talk to tenants in those districts. My office represents tenants in those districts and say, no, these are what they're standing up for and they're not standing up for.
Right.
And then we as a community need to respond.
Right.
There's a lot of predatory equity developments going on in that district. And so both people will need to know what they're going to do in response to that. What are they going to do for those low-income tenants who are struggling?
Right. I think predatory equity has been in the news a lot recently. So has Airbnb.
Yeah.
Airbnb, for people who aren't familiar, Airbnb is an online business that lets you rent your apartment as though it were a hotel room. The problem is that it occupies a stock of affordable housing. So somebody who's not living in their apartment, who's renting it out on a nightly or however long basis and using it as a hotel, you know, 50,000 homeless people, well, you know, a couple of them could be sleeping in that apartment because, well, you know.
Yeah, and all the SRO units that we're losing.
Right.
And the reality is, unfortunately, some of our friends are trying to weaken the rent laws because Airbnb is putting a lot of pressure on them.
Right.
To kind of bring in new legislation to allow what they're doing to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's really critical that we have laws to prevent this from happening. We're losing affordable housing left and right, and every little thing is going to dig away at it.
I think it was really powerful. I know a large coalition of people have struck back against Airbnb. I think originally HCC, Housing Conservation Coordinators, were leading the charge, sounding the bell or the alarm that if Airbnb is allowed to do what they're looking to do and undo our illegal hotel laws, then rent stabilization is in serious trouble.
Yeah, I know they had a lobby day in Albany yesterday.
Yes.
Both Goddard Riverside's SRO Law Project and Housing Conservation Coordinators are really talking about this issue. It's a really important issue. We also, I mean, there's so many issues to talk about, like, you know, I know Chaya and Queens is talking about their base campaign and talking about legalization of basement apartments. That could be a tool that we could bring in potentially hundreds of thousands of units back into rent stabilization
Right.
through a process of legalization and through a tax abatement program. There's a way to get those units, one, to legalize, which makes them safer for the people who are there, and two, puts them into a regulatory system that brings real affordability, not just we're at $421A and
Right.
$4,000 a month. We're talking basement apartments that are renting for $1,000 a month
Right.
with families who are low income, who are the population that we need to protect. And those units could really add a lot to the units. So there's a lot of opportunities to talk about expanding the rent stabilization housing stock that community groups around the city are really focusing on.
Right. I remember with the basement apartments and granny flats, that was something that Mayor de Blasio talked a lot about during his campaign.
You know, and that's one good thing about his housing platform is in the housing platform he talked about the basement apartments. He also talked about mandatory inclusionary zoning, which we've had a 12 years of Bloomberg with a voluntary inclusionary zoning that didn't get us real units.
Yeah.
But so at least if they're going to talk about upzonings, we're going to talk about requiring developers to put affordable housing units at deeply affordable units in those development plans, and hopefully get 50% of those units to be long-term affordable housing, which we didn't see at all through the Bloomberg years. So those are some real game changers to not just talk about the million apartments we have, but the potential for millions of new apartments that could be rent stabilized apartments, which could add to our numbers of people who are organizing around rent renewal.
Absolutely. Well, you've been watching Tenant Action today. We're on the air every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. Thanks for watching, and please tune in again next week.